Welcome to Steve Nallon's Ghost Stories. This episode, The Ghost Light, a theatre ghost story of murder and vengeance. The Ghost Light. What was the inspiration behind this tale?
There's always been the tradition in theatre of a theatre ghost. So I think probably the most famous one is the man in grey, who is meant to walk across the upper circle in the Theatre Royal, Drury Lane. And what's interesting about this, apparently he walks across the circle and disappears into a wall. In 1870, somebody knocked that wall down and found behind it a door which led into a room where there was a skeleton that had been stabbed to death.
Oh, blimey.
And that's why the man in grey, who wears this sort of three-pointed hat thing, is meant to be the most famous sort of theatre ghost. So I'm working within tradition, so I wanted my own theatre ghost story.
So, Steve, what's the story behind the story of The Ghost Light?
Well, I needed a narrator. I was like sort of having character narrators. And the inspiration for the narrator really came in COVID, because so many friends on Facebook and Instagram, they put up images of a ghost light. Now, in a theatre, when a theatre goes dark, because there's no touring companies coming in, there's a tradition that a lamp, which is on a stand, is placed center stage, and it's a symbol of hope. Really, it's a symbol that the dark theatre, as it's known, will eventually find people who will come back. And I thought these images were very moving, actually, of this single light that is there. I mean, there's a practical side as well, because people come into the building, they want to be able to see, but it's a great tradition. And then I realized it's called the Ghost Light, so why not have that physical object, inanimate object, tell the story? And it's so we've talked about this before, sort of my animism obsession of making inanimate objects and houses tell stories. But there's also, with this one, I think there's a sort of that Latin phrase, which is genius loci, which is a sort of the protective spirit of the of the building, and I sort of explain it as all the people that have treaded the boards. Now, I think the story itself it's probably the most traditional in the collection. There is a twist, but it's not gobsmacking. I sort of think that the appeal of the story is really the characters. And I've got this. I sent the story off to a friend of mine who's the casting director on The Mousetrap, and she's also directed The Mousetrap a few times. Anyway, she said, "Thanks so much for sending this across. I loved this so much. I've worked with these people. I know them. I've met many Dereks in my life. Derek's the director who can't decide what to do. I've worked with those. The whole thing gave me a warm feeling as I read it. And speaking as somebody who has toured in many whodunits over the years, because the theatre is host to a whodunit, I think you've caught the world so well." And then she goes on to say, "It's funny, as there's a rumour that St. Martin's Theatre is haunted." That's where The Mousetrap is on. "And the ghost as only ever appears when there is tension in the building." And I've did some research, and the ghost is called Meggie Albanese. And sadly, an actress who died in the 1920s, I think. She was only about 24. So, but I think for me, it's the characters rather than the story itself that is the appeal. And I hope that people who will recognize those characters, whether they're from theatre or not. And it's also got a revenge element as well.
Yeah, I think people always love to hear about behind the scenes. So, like, that's definitely something that that somebody who doesn't work in the theatre can really latch onto as well. It's like a literal peek behind the curtain.
Well, it is, and I do have some fun with some of the terminology that we take as actors, we take for granted, such as "kill the workers." You go into a theatre, you kill the workers, and you think, what's going on here? And it means just switch off the working lights. So the working lights are at the very top of the on the ceiling, above the set and stuff. And it just means it's switch them off. But you get all these slightly weird traditions and superstitions.
Superstitions, I was going to say, very superstitious.
We'll talk about those later. But it was. I enjoyed writing it for the characters because, in my head, I knew who they were as I was writing them. And Denise very kindly has said that she knows them too. When you're on tour in a play, there's always understudy rehearsals. And my ghost light, the voice is a bit snobby, to be honest, like people who sort of really know that they're in a second-rate place, but they tend to be a bit patronizing and snobby. So he doesn't normally watch the understudy rehearsals. He can't be bothered with all that sort of stuff. But in this one, when the understudy Daphne wears these emerald opals in the final scene, her performance changes.
Now, in truth, I rarely, if ever, take much notice of understudy runs. Frankly, they are uninspiring affairs, and the standard of acting hardly raises itself above the adequate at best. Yet, that final scene between the dowdry postmistress and the pompous former colonel was electrifying. Dearest Daphne had little more than said her lines during the previous two acts. Suddenly, in that confrontation, there was on display an extraordinary passion. Even Ron, the jaded stage manager, lifted his head to witness the drama. But the true strangeness, for me, came at the curtain call. Yes, it may come as a surprise to you, but curtain calls, referred to as "who's best" by the more cynical members in our profession, are indeed rehearsed. An empty and silent auditorium bestows on the bows a sense of the surreal. However, when Daphne took hers, from on high, somewhere in the upper gallery, which we call the gods, there was sustained applause. You will wish to know from whom it came, for I have both ears and eyes. Yet, I must tell you, though I heard clapping, hands I saw not. Most mysterious.
So as the trailer, again, has just shown us, this film, a very British film, it's In Fabric from 2018. It's by Peter Strickland. I think it's very unsettling and mesmerizing. it makes me feel strange emotions related to my grandma dragging me around department stores. It's supernatural and psychological, and it's an object, a cursed red dress that really does wreak havoc in various different situations. Some quite comic and some really scary. I think very surreal. Lots of social satire in there. It's a dreamlike film. Peter Strickland, I do like his style. It's similar in some ways to Giallo, and I think, from my opinion, you might feel differently. We'll see what Steve says in a moment. But I think it's a really good companion to the Ghostlight, and the reason being, and I'll put my case together. Objects imbued with supernatural energy feels very Steve Nallon. Dark secrets, a malevolent force, eerie presence. If we think of eerie presences, empty theaters can feel eerie as well. Almost, there's both stories, I feel, have this bridge between the living and the dead, a deep connection between performance spaces and spirits. And I think that, certainly the fashion world is a performance as well. So I like the idea that, some things never truly leave the stage, even after the final curtain falls, or in this case, a dress. So what were your thoughts on it? Do you agree with that sort of roughly?
I do. I absolutely agree with it, and I think Peter Strickland would love that summary. It's brilliant. There's that line that they actually find in the dress, don't they? You who wear me will know me. I think something like that. So there is absolutely that direct connection. In my story, it's emerald opals that the main actress doesn't wear, but the understudy does for various reasons. I mean, the film itself, it's sort of Ken Loach meets Dario Argento, if there is such a thing.
That's a perfect. Perfect.
And Marianne, I think Jean-Baptiste, she's slightly in the Mike Leigh film, and Ratma, is it Ratma Mohammed is the Romanian actress, but she's in a different film. But oddly enough, I think they're so committed to what they're doing that even though they're in slightly different styles, it really works. And that's part of the eeriness, that this very sort of naturalistic performance is meeting this very, very stylized performance. And I really liked it. And the giallo is red. There's red dress, the red fingernails, menstruation. There is the red baby. That's a really creepy image. The blooded baby, and even the red laundry basket, and the dress is very malevolent, and how it destroys the washing machine.
That's really scary. I find that bit really scary.
It really is. And when she pulls the plug out, and it's and I've seen another of Peter Strickland's films, which is called Berberian Sound Studio with Toby Jones. And what I found was interesting about that, we'll talk about this as it were another day, but it was influential to a degree on one of my other stories, For the Hell of It, because it's, to me, when I watched that, it was sort of set in a purgatory sort of world of half alive, half dead, and you get that theme as well in Fabric. But I think the first half is better than the second. In my opinion, the second two stories are good, but they don't have the fleshed out side that the first half does. But it's an interesting, that final image is going. The camera goes down, and you, without giving too much away, you see the different dresses that are being made. It's very threatening, and it is.
And with it being British, there's an element of humor there that maybe you don't always get in a giallo. So you see people like Julian Barrett from Mighty Boosh, and they're playing it very similar to they would if it was a comedy. But there's also
Well, it
a
is a comedy.
essential. Well, it is, yeah,
It is a comedy, and there's some I won't say. Well, I'd say more bizarre than anything.
Yeah. It's definitely surreal, isn't it? Yeah,
it's definitely in a world of its own. But that mixture of styles, I think works really well with it. Actually, it was yeah. And I've seen it several times now, so I've really enjoyed In Fabric, and it's not as well known as it should be.
No, I don't think it is either, and I think it's interesting because it's probably more. You can connect to it more than possibly the title and the design of it makes you think. It looks like it's going to be a very serious, worthy film, and then it isn't. It's actually quite wild and wonderful, and particularly it traverses different classes as well. So you've got, it's not just about, sort of rich people's problems or people in a certain setting. You see, but they're all presented in this highly stylized way, which you haven't really seen. I certainly haven't seen done in that way. So, I think we've said on previous episodes, I'd rather be confused than bored. And this is one of those films where you're never bored. It is just full of interesting.
Yeah, and also trying to work out exactly. Yeah, you're also trying to work out exactly what the dress is. Is the dress possessed by a previous owner? Is it a malevolent spirit? Have the coven? There's a coven almost like saying the people who work in the shop. They're all dressed in a sort of gothic, and they're doing weird things, and that seems to affect the dress. So there's
that's interesting.
That go on. So there's sort of witchcraft elements as well as the dress being possessed and also possessing of the person who wears it. So there's a lot going on.
yeah, it's funny because you mentioned about the coven side of it, and I was thinking, because one of my favorite sort of films that I'm always telling people to watch is Norman Warren's Satan's Slave, and in that, you've got this group of people who are kind of practicing black magic, and it was something that we saw a lot of in the 70s. A lot of films had this. In Fabric doesn't explore that massively, but it's just fun to have it there, I think.
It is fun to have it there, and it throws another question mark. He likes his question marks, I think, does Peter Strickland, because I don't think anything is ever properly explained in the Barbarian Sound Studio either.
Oh, it isn't. No.
You can find your own meaning, and that's great. With my own story, as I said, mine is far more traditional than In Fabric, and it's a sort of standard theatre ghost story, really, and a revenge tale, but with a twist as well. Well, I love Scott Brooker's artwork for this, partly because I can match in with the orange. I very rarely wear orange, but I can. I think it's the most dramatic. Well, it's the most dramatic moment in the story, which won't reveal too much, but the image itself suggests, the hand and attacking clearly an actor on stage. And what's interesting about Scott's work is how he works, and here we can see the progression, really. So the actor is based on an actual photograph that Scott took of a sort of an in-law relative, I think, and you can see how he layers it with each version of the image, and the time that he takes for each of how it's progressed. So you eventually get the sort of magic hand. It's not, we won't sort of explain what that means, but it's clearly a ghost hand. But it's starting with the photograph. So he's really as much a director in some ways, because he's creating the image visually in his head as he's working with whoever it is that is going to be the sort of model for it. And I just think it shows the amount of work that he puts into.
Oh yeah. Oh, totally. Yeah. Yeah. As a non-artist, or you can't even draw a stick man, the idea of doing this, you know, step by step, by painstaking step, is like magic for me to see the pictures and to hear you talk about it. It's just a completely different kind of creativity.
And it was and when we were talking about images, we had exactly the same thought. This one is the climactic moment when the ghost gets the revenge that's wanted. And it was far more than I anticipated, but that's why I loved it so much. It's brilliant.
So, Steve, what story have you paired with your own tale?
Well, it's called The Fourth Wall, and I found it in this collection, which is a Christmas season collection by a man, Alfred McClellan Burridge. Now, the fourth wall in the theatre is the imagined wall between the stage and the auditorium. So that's where that idea comes from. That's where the term comes from, fourth wall. So with this particular story, it's a classic ghost story where somebody is recuperating from an illness. A group of friends hire a cottage, and then some strange things happen. And the strange thing that happens in the fourth wall is that they're sort of in the sitting room downstairs, and everybody starts acting as if they're self-consciously in a play. And then the story develops, and eventually the fourth wall disappears, and they are in a play, and they're watching the audience, or they're seeing the audience. But it's not really a ghost story in a way, because they later discover that an actor spent a lot of his time learning his lines in that particular cottage, and somehow his personality has imbued itself in the place.
Another object that's
another object that has sort of by osmosis has sort of taken in his personality, and it's quite a sweet little tale. And I love those tales that aren't horrid. You get so much, horror in ghost stories, but here's one that has quite a lot of charm about it. And I think charm is probably the right word. So it's and actually, I discovered, as I read about 300 ghost stories, there are very few theatre ghost stories as fiction. Loads in real life.
That's surprising.
Yeah. I was surprised. At least I haven't found that many. There are a couple, actually. There's one where an actor in a play dresses up in a costume in order to frighten somebody, but that happens not in the theatre. That happens in the tavern where they're staying. So yeah, but I think it's simply the fact that so many theatre ghost stories are so interesting in themselves. Fact is stranger than fiction, as ever.
So my obscure but fascinating fact is about In Fabric, and a little bit selfishly, it kind of relates to what I said earlier on about memories of being dragged around the shops like Debenhams and BHS and things when I was a child, and that stilted way that salespeople used to talk to people. I suppose a little bit like "Are you being served?" or something along those lines, but without the humour, more odd. So this is a lesser known fact about In Fabric. So essentially, the Eerie department store were inspired by Peter Strickland's experiences, which sound very similar to mine. He was referencing Debenhams and John Lewis's and the hypnotic dialogue and unsettling sales assistants. I'm quoting what he said. They're drawn from the peculiar way the shop workers spoke in rehearsed, almost robotic tones, something that he found really unsettling as a child. And thinking back, something I found really strange as a child as well. They're very rigid, very upright, repeating phrases. It is very robotic and it is very rehearsed. And I guess that rehearsal side of it is maybe what's connected me to in your story, the ghost light, and in Fabric, and kind of push those two ideas together. So that was my strange little fact about In Fabric.
Well, that's really interesting because they are acting, aren't they? And they've got lines that they have to use when they, excuse me, madam, are you being served? I'm doing my little John Inman there just to show that in. I thought I might as well.
I love that. I think the little heart through that.
My obscure fact actually is about many London theatre ghosts, but actually I thought I'd mention Oldham Coliseum, which was built in 1885, and there's a tradition and superstition in the theatre that if you are doing what we call the Scottish play, you do not mention the name, and you do not do the lines of the Scottish play, which is basically, I call it MacDoo-doo, and you don't do the lines except in the rehearsal room. And I've worked with actors who are incredibly strict about that. Anyway, the point here is that there was an actor in 1947 called Harold Norman, who was the lead in the Scottish play, who refused to acknowledge the tradition. And guess what? On one of the nights when MacDoo-doo is having a fight with Macduff, he was injured for real and died. And his ghost is meant to be seen at the Oldham Coliseum, sometimes apparently sitting in the auditorium. But it's that thing where actors, in fact, anybody who has a ritual in their job, and that it matters for the footballers are like this. They have rituals where when they go into the changing room, they've got the way they put things on the bench, and actors are like that in the preparation. So it's there's just a concept of superstition.
I wonder if that's the reason that answers your question why there's not a lot of stories about theatre ghosts and theatre based scary things happening, because they happen for real and the people are so superstitious they don't want to share them and don't want to talk about them because they're scared of it happening to them.
I think that makes absolute sense. In a sense, we don't need the fictions as well, because we've got so many sort of superstitions. We're in that, we're sort of living. If you're in a theatre, you're living in that world. As soon as you go, through the stage door, you've got certain traditions that you've got to, keep up with. So it's, I think you're right.
To draw the curtain on our final take for the ghost light, I was thinking of the lingering presence of horror. So both In Fabric and the ghost light, they remind us that theatre and fashion both carry echoes of the past. And whether it's the ghosts or former actors, or whether it's an energy of someone who once wore a dress, these stories, they tap into a lot of our fears. And the idea that objects hold memories and those can be malevolent as well, really serves as a reminder that, things that we sometimes think as props or just items or things that we haven't looked at for a long time, they have a life of their own. And that was really scary to me. So that was my final take.
Well, that's really, I really like that. And what I was going to mention was a character called Barbara Nice, who's performed by Janice Connolly. And she found the perfect dress for her character in I think it's the Cats League or something. There's a charity shop especially for cats, and in her show she gets the audience to give a round of applause for the woman who died, so that she can wear this dress on stage.
Oh, so I love the Barbara Nice character. It's so funny you bring that up because she's like a Stopfordian, like from Stockport character, much like myself. So I recognize that character so much.
I'm glad you like her, and Janice is wonderful, but she's brilliant at finding the right wig or the right dress. And she said she found it in the Cat Support League or whatever it's called, and she brings it into the show. She brings the poor woman who handed it over. She brings her into the show, and it's exactly what you said. There's a sort of life in that dress as there is in fabric and in the emerald opals in the Ghostlight. Who Fed the Cat? This is the image for it. A wonderful lady in a coffin. And for the story, we have to go, for the only story in the collection, we go across the pond to America and the tradition of film noir, which, and a friend of mine called my story, the Who Fed the Cat, a ghost noir, which, well, I suppose it's a new genre.